wonderful people. Let me tell you why I've gathered you here today. I've been meaning to talk to Alec for a while now. We are very, very overdue on a Copaganda discussion, and Alec just put out an amazing book. So I said, that's the perfect time for us to talk about it, especially because I had my my partner's baby brothers over for the weekend, and I was trying to show them the Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers movie and explain to them that it is propaganda, that they have these these little chipmunks on a deep quest to imprison all the bad guys, and they're trying to claim. You wouldn't believe this. In the Chip and Dale movie, the whole storyline is that Peter Pan is running an underground, like, straight to DVD movie trafficking operation, and he's getting all the like former has-been cartoons. He's like kidnapping them and forcing them to make straight to DVD movies. And then Chip and Dale, who as children I didn't realize that they were voluntary ops. I never noticed, like, oh wow, they're little cops. They go to the police, and the police are like, oh my god, because of all these like big bad rights, all this like Fourth Amendment stuff, our hands are tied, like, because of this. So be the good guys, help the police try and get Peter Pan. I'm like, the whole household like, this is propaganda. You see this? So I realized that the propaganda discussions need to be more mainstream than they are. So I said, let me get Alec, and Alec can tell me about his new book.
I'm so happy to be here, and I love what you do and all of the amazing work that you've done and trying to get people to think a little bit differently about all of these systems of mass punishment and brutality. And for me, in my part, in doing our civil rights work over the years, I've been approaching it in a similar way. I mean, a lot of the fights that we're in court and in jails and all over the country, it really has to do with how people think about the police and how people think about punishment, how people think about safety. And I just sort of became obsessed with how the news media is distorting our understandings of those concepts. And I'm always happy to come anywhere to talk at people about it.
What do you, and I guess Cal, you can tell me too, what do you think has been the most difficult thing about getting people to think differently about the police and the criminal justice system? Like, what do you think is most striking about the propaganda?
There's so many hard things because the level of propaganda is so pervasive. People are they're sort of relentlessly exposed to stuff that is totally wrong and totally misleading. I would say maybe the most important thing, the thing that I keep coming back to, is this myth that what we do with little tweaks to the bureaucracy of punishment, like little policies of the police or prosecutors, sentence increases here or there, or bail reform, or all these things that you hear about in the news, this myth that those things have a significant impact on our safety is so profound. It's really hard to shake people out of it. But it's like climate science denial. What we know from the actual evidence is that the levels of harm in our society, the extent to which people hurt each other, is much more correlated with big features of our society like inequality, access to housing, access to healthcare, early childhood education, exposure to toxic like chemicals, lead, toxic masculinity,
Right.
levels of alienation and loneliness, or in societies that have much less violence, human connection. And those are the things that actually determine whether people hurt each other, not like whether the local police precinct has certain surveillance software or whether the sentence for some crime is 7 years or 3 years, or all the things the media talks about. It's always drawing a connection between the punishment bureaucracy and all the people who profit from it and crime and safety. And that is just totally wrong, but it's been very, very hard to shake people out of that.
What do you think, Cal?
I think the language is so powerful, and like the language we use around safety and violence. So like, for example, I'm constantly aware of this. We use the language of war for everything, right? Trade, war chest, politics, like this. The language. It's
Yeah.
really hard to like. We're so socialized in language that we don't even realize we're using language of incarceration or carcerality or violence when we are, right? And there's an intention behind that. So, I'm a big proponent of like using the language of abduction when talking about policing and arrests and detainment and containment. caging, right? Like if we actually, like I tell my students this and all the people I work with, like if we actually use the language to describe what is happening, like in those stark terms, that's one way to sort of get people to see like the kind of logics behind it, because the kind of bureaucratic language of incarceration, even that word incarceration it's divested from the violence that is in that word, right?
Right.
So I think language is a huge component too.
What do y'all think about the current landscape? Because if you'd asked me 5 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I thought we were making incredible strides in terms of how we were getting these topics and these new thought, like these new ways of interacting with these ideas and these new ways of discussing things. I thought where we were making a lot of headway. I don't know about right this particular moment, but I'm in doom and gloom, so I'd love to hear what y'all think about it.
Well, I would just say it's a very scary time. It's a very dark time. And my book, Copaganda, is actually not really about like the right wing.
Yeah.
There's a lot to say about the far right, and I think it's very dangerous, obviously. And it's got its own set of incentives and its own ecosystem and its own propaganda sort of methods, right? And that is all very, very scary. And we are entering a period in our society's history from which there may be no return, no question about it. But what I'm really interested in, at least for me, is studying the ways in which and talking about the ways in which institutions that portray themselves or even think of themselves as like liberal and progressive, things like the news media, universities and experts and professors, nonprofits, how are those institutions actually in their own sort of propagandistic way adopting and validating and normalizing and embedding many of the same exact right-wing assumptions and mythologies and narratives, because it's only through the widespread acceptance of some of these concepts that the broader swath of the public comes to feel normally, sort of that this mass brutality is normal. I don't think what we're seeing now would have been possible if the Democratic Party and the New York Times and the other, NBC News and the Atlantic, and if they hadn't manufactured consent for not only being afraid of immigrants, poor people, Black people, and other people of color, strangers, right? This idea that we should be afraid of all of the most marginalized people in our society and not people in power who are actually committing crimes that are causing far more death and destruction.
Yeah.
That's normalized in the mainstream press. And if we have any way out of this, I think the anti-fascist coalition has to stop adopting a lot of the narratives of the far right, because if you validate all of those assumptions and narratives, people will choose and they start to believe in those things, people will choose the real deal. They'll go with the real fascist rather than the fascist light.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing with the Democrats right now. And so I think it is, fairly doom and gloom, but also if we use this moment to gather well-meaning people who want a society with less violence, more safety, less harm, more flourishing for people, places to live and healthcare, and places for children to do fun things with each other, like all of the things that like most ordinary people actually want to see in the world. There's enormous consensus over those things, and if we strip away some of the propaganda that has gotten people to think that the path toward that society is actually more investment in state surveillance and authoritarian punishment, and we strip that away, and we unite in a sort of anti-fascist coalition that is actually focused on the root causes of harm and the things people need in their lives, then I think we might have a chance, because I think that the actual number of fascists is quite small.
Yeah.
And we have to stop validating their worldview.
Yeah, I agree a lot with your point about the mainstream media and the manufactured consent. And it goes back to my point about language, but in fascism, okay, what does it mean if the New York Times runs an editorial that says we are in a fascist area? Or like you're starting to see the language of fascism more and more in the mainstream press, and I'm like, this is part of the like y'all got us here in many ways by normalizing all these things you're talking about, and it's so I don't know. Part of me wants to move away from our subscriptions, our mainstream whatever, our mainstream press credentials, and I'm like, how do we build something? How do we build stories? How do we build um, worlds and narratives that can get out there without being in these kind of mainstream ways? So I teach ethnic studies in California. I'm in Oakland, California, and I do with my students. I do a ton of and I teach in community college. So a lot of my students are uh, directly impacted by the carceral system, either as formerly or currently incarcerated, family members incarcerated. I myself identify as formerly incarcerated. I have been twice. I have been sentenced to jail, and I have lived that experience. And so, one is normalizing kind of the experiences of incarcerated people in education, but then it's how do we use those stories or people who are subject to what I call like cop adjacent systems, right? You can think of all the kind of government bureaucracy as cop adjacent because it's all connected. And how do we get these narratives out, get our stories out, get our word out that does not rely on some of these mainstream outlets? So, you know, like I'm noticing in community colleges, zines are making a big comeback from the 90s. I have lots of students that make zines, and we are making zines and trying to get those into um, just get them out there. If it's on a website, if it's on the community college website, if it's on the Free Press in Oakland, right? Like I'm just trying to think of ways to get these stories out there and legitimize kind of direct voice instead of voices that are run through the kind of consent manufacturing machines that we're talking about. And I think that's huge.
What do you think, Alec, as far as like these different narratives that you think you've been seeing a lot on the left or from progressive institutions that you think kind of lean into that right-wing framing of carcerality?
Basically everything that's in the New York Times. It's a hard question to answer, but I think Kyle was just making, I think, really important points about what language is used. So you see just routinely in all mainstream news, you see mass policing crushing poor people described as quality of life enforcement. You know, just these terms that feel sort of objective and neutral, but like when you stop to think about them, well, whose quality of life and what does that even mean? You know, or the idea of tough on crime, right? So these policies that are actually scientifically proven to increase crime and that ignore crime by people in power and elite people are suddenly called tough on crime, as
Right.
opposed to, let's say, Medicaid expansion and early childhood education, which have been proven to be the most effective things you can do to fight crime. I mean, these terms, you know, the way we use language, like there's always a staffing crisis in police forces and prisons instead of there being too many people in prison
Yeah.
or too many people in jail. So the language is important, but I think that like the even more, so there's, you can go even deeper. So it's not just what words are they using in these stories, you know, officer involved shooting instead of saying police shot someone, right? That's very important. But a deeper level is who are the sources in these stories? Who's being quoted? Whose perspective is offered? What are you being told about those people? And you know, sources are so important. And I have a whole chapter on this in my book. I also have a whole chapter on the language stuff. But sources are so important because the sources that you see quoted in the news, it's kind of like an iceberg. You know, they're the tip of the iceberg, but there's this vast underwater world of these people who are shaping even what stories are covered
Yeah.
and what angle those stories are covered from. I know that because I've been a source for the news for many years, and sources play an enormous role in even telling journalists what stories are even out there. And so the news every single day is covering a very tiny sliver of all the things that are happening in the world. It has to decide, am I going to cover this shoplifting at a Walgreens or this wage theft by Walgreens of their
Yeah.
own workers, right? And all of these stories, these are political choices. These are
Yeah.
ideological choices. And then even deeper than that, even deeper from like how these stories are framed is the questions like what is newsworthy in the first place. um you know I used to pitch stories a lot to the mainstream media, and they would say things to me like, oh yeah, it's really bad that all these people in Oakland or San Francisco or Cleveland or whatever are being detained illegally because they can't pay money bail, separated from their kids, their pets are dying, their medications are interrupted, they're losing their jobs. That's really bad. But like, you know what? Somebody else in this other news outlet just did a story on the cash bail system like 3 weeks ago, and so we don't have a new angle. But like,
Yeah.
they never say that about like some instance of shoplifting. You never hear a local news anchor in Cleveland say, "Well, we can't cover like the armed robbery today or the shoplifting because somebody in Dallas did an article on a different armed robbery in Dallas." I mean, so this very idea of what kinds of harm to which people are seen as newsworthy, and
Yeah.
then what is the volume of news coverage about those things. Like this famous thing, Kyle, you probably saw this out in the Bay Area a few years ago. There was like a viral video of someone stealing in Walgreens on like a bicycle, and they rolled out of Walgreens. That one viral video spawned 309 news stories around the country. And during that same period, there were almost no news stories in the United States about tax evasion, which is
Yeah.
about 60 times the economic harm, or even wage theft, $50 billion a year. It's 5 times all property crime combined. So tax evasion is 60 times all property crime combined. Forget about shoplifting. I'm talking about shoplifting, robbery, all kinds of other theft. So these massive problems are not getting the same volume of coverage. So it's not just the language in the stories or the sources or what is even a story. It's what are we bombarded with like push alerts on our phone and what's in the daily news every night, and that is really shaping how we think.
No, that's an absolutely excellent point, because that makes me think of the times like when I was still hosting Rising, and people will always refer to Rising as like this populist show, or they'd say, "Oh, they have like someone left and someone right on the show," and I'm like, yeah, but the whole look at the content of what they're choosing in the topics, not just how it's being covered or how the progressive voice has to talk about this right wing issue, but look at the framing of it in and of itself and what topics they're choosing to cover, all these right wing conspiracies and all that kind of nut shit. And so, yeah, that's a really valuable point. It's not just how things are being covered, because I think a lot of the focus is how things are being covered, who's covering it, but there isn't a lot of attention paid on what people choose to cover, and how a lot of the over coverage on certain issues like inflates the idea of things. I think about the Pretrial Fairness Act, what they were calling the Purge Law before it passed in Illinois, and how many news stories were devoted before the law was even implemented,
Mhm.
months and months and months before. How many news stories were saying, "Oh, the police aren't able to do the job." Chicago PD is saying, "Oh, because of this law, people are out and passing all this propaganda." But because they're seeing it so much, if you see something a lot, it immediately reads to the average like reader and consumer as, "Oh, breaking news, this is happening, that's being covered a lot because it's a big problem," and that's what they think of it as. And then it fuels. It's funny because it fuels itself on there's a level of, I'm sure there are people in the media or creators or whatever have you who think they're just responding to the marketplace, that this is what people are interested in, that people, they drive to these stories that give them one criminal, one immigrant, one somebody to coalesce around, and they don't, and that the sexy stories aren't white collar crime and government corruption and all these different things. But it's also the marketplace is responding to, that's how it's been trained. You know what I mean? That's what people have been fed. That's what's framed to them as exciting. They don't make it exciting, and to interact with the reality of these much greater harms being done by much more powerful people.
I think a part of the issue too is like, well, one, we don't local journalism is less funded, so we're relying on syndicated news, and syndicated news is coming into smaller communities. I've lived in rural Ohio, Washington State, Idaho, and a lot of the local news is just syndicated from these bigger conglomerates because of all of these cuts, right? So it's not only like the ideological choice of what is the news and what gets covered, that is just getting pushed onto smaller communities, and people are starting like, that's what they think, and I thought for a long time like the news is what is syndicated from the Post or the Wall Street Journal or from the New York Times. And like out here in the Bay Area, the most of the news is syndicated from like the Chronicle or the San Francisco Chronicle or the Oakland Tribune or the East Bay Times or the Mercury. Like, and this is a place of 2 million people, but those news stories get recycled and recycled and recycled. And in San Francisco, you know, we have the new mayor, Lori, who is a billionaire from the Levi fortune, and the news is constantly giving him his flowers undeserved for like cleaning up the BART stations. And I was in the Palace City BART station last night coming up, and this is like normally an active, people are congregating, people are selling stuff, it's not dangerous at all. And now there's a freaking SWAT truck right in the middle of it. And Mayor Lori is just cleaning up the city like he was elected to do. And it's like, you're not fixing that problem, you're shuffling it, right? But the news is talking about it, especially out here, the Bay Area of millions of people, as you know, finally a mayor that can get things done. And it's maddening, and people, all, you know, everyone in my circle is not right wing, at least on the surface, right? But they are buying into this, like, oh, Lori's doing a good job, or you know, in Oakland, we just had the special election with Barbara Lee and Lauren Taylor, and it's still not decided who's the mayor yet. But like all of that language and all of the like the news coverage is like, yeah, Barbara Lee, she's going to come in and she is going to bring all of her sort of years in Washington and bring it back to Oakland. And it's like, you know, I don't know. It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating to see all that rhetoric recycled on the local level.
That's a really interesting point you make about the fact that it's these national news outlets and it's being syndicated locally, because it makes me think of something my friend Deshaun Harrison said to me recently on Olay and Friends. Deshaun was pointing out that the issue with how people perceive civil rights movements, everyone's always chasing a national thing instead of what really needs to happen to really, you know, achieve some success, to really understand what's necessary on the ground, are these local organizations, are these local moves. But everyone's always trying to make everything national, and it has a really negative impact on the local areas there. And I think that I see the correlation between that and what you're saying about these national syndicates and how it's not translated into the local news.
And then like the civil right, you know, for the civil rights example, that becomes the benchmark, and anything below that or above that is not worthy or is not doing it right. And the same is with news. Like if you're not telling these stories like we're talking about that are heavy on supposed crime and heavy on, you know, glorifying violence, then you're not telling the news that people want. And like that's why I'm a huge, in my classroom I was saying, like, I am huge. We make news and we put it out, and on websites, we put it out in zines, we put it out in free presses, and we say like, this is the news too. The news is what is going on in your community directly and how you are addressing that. Good, bad, whatever, right? Like that is news just as worthy as anything that is ad driven or profit driven or what, even non-profit driven. Like yeah, I can't stress that enough with our students.
I've been trying to think about the best ways. What are the best ways to educate people about propaganda, and also to try to make an example or to illustrate to people what it is? Because I've realized it's easier. People, you know, when you first kind of introduce people to propaganda, they get it from the perspective of like, okay, Law and Order, you know. And I have a popular op-ed on Teen Vogue where I talk about the impact of Law and Order, to which is, you know, of course, and all the cop shows and all that. But the thing is, I find that to me the most troubling propaganda is propaganda people don't notice. When they think it's like, okay, yeah, Law and Order, I get it. It's a cop show and it's celebrating the cops. We love the cops, so they get that. But they don't get as much when, like, did y'all watch Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the second one? Alec, you have to watch it. Alec, I need you to watch 2 movies for me just so we can talk about them. I need you to watch the Chip and Dale like live action movie, that movie. I need you to watch that, and I need you to watch the second Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Like I went with my friend to go see that, and we're both public defenders. It was Alex, LOL overruled, Lolo, and we were like, I looked at him like, what is the runtime on this? Like this is wild. And I find that stuff like how it shows up in, and I don't have a problem. Let me just be clear. I don't have a problem with propaganda and things like pop-up girls is where I notice it in all my like cartoons or Darkwing Duck or whatnot. It's not inherently that I have an issue with these things because I think there's an importance in media analysis, and I think these things kind of provide you an opportunity to teach. So I don't have an issue with it existing. I have an issue with like there never being the analysis of, they're pushing cops. Like this is that's what this is. It's pushing on you a particular narrative. Even just if you notice when you watch Spider-Man in the movies, every time the crime starts, they're in Brooklyn. They made it a point in the movie to show you him on the subway. He didn't ride the subway any other time than to go to Brooklyn and have criminals show up on the subway. I'm like, nobody noticed that? Anybody peep? Like, and so similar, it's things like that I've been trying. I think I kind of want to shift my attention now. How do I make people see it in there every day, the way that it's covertly hidden in the media you just consume, and not just the cop shows or when they tell you or they're on the nose about it. But also, I've noticed that people don't even realize it when it's on the nose, because I've been watching The Boys recently. I don't know if you've seen The Boys, Alec?
Nope.
It shouldn't surprise me that you don't consume propaganda in your off time, but it makes sense. But I'm also like, Alec, goddamn it, you need to go see it.
I'm like for me, I have a real, and I talk about this in the last chapter of the book, which is all about how we can resist propaganda. And I talk a lot about what Kyle was just saying too, about coming together with others in your community and actually intervening in the stories that are being told in your community. And there's a lot to be said about that. But for me, it's like part of fortifying my mind against the relentless propaganda is not consuming that much of it. Although I agree with you, it's actually quite, and this is why I still read the New York Times sometimes. I think we have to consume it for the purpose of helping to expose for other people what this stuff is doing to our brains.
Right.
And like you said, the most effective propaganda is propaganda that you can't notice as propaganda. Yeah. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand, but that I try to explain really clearly with examples in the book. The very, very best propaganda, at least against, liberal people and well-meaning people, like I think the kind of propaganda that's pitched to like, far-right militias is maybe a little bit different. But the very best propaganda is based on true facts. If you try to base it on a fact that is easily falsifiable, then people may not trust you. So, for example, if I told you that there's that this is a video of a murder, and then it turns out it actually wasn't a video of a murder at all, there nobody died, you might not believe me later. But if I showed you 5 videos of murders in a row, or 50 videos every single day, a different murder, and they're all true murders, you might start to think as a news consumer that murders are going up, even if murders are down this year. And the example I like giving people is, if you asked me to tell you about Steph Curry or Michael Jordan, I could make a montage of every missed shot in their career. It would be like 4 hours long of just missed shots. I could convince you using entirely true anecdotes that Steph Curry and Michael Jordan were bad shooters or bad basketball players. And what the news essentially is doing when it shows you all those shopliftings or all those murders or whatever it is, it's creating a false narrative using true anecdote. Yeah. And those are the hardest to counter, because it's very easy to just say, actually, that video is a fake. But it's much harder to say, well, yeah, I mean, that video is true, but actually, based on what's being excluded from you and what you're not being told and which stories are not being covered, you're getting a distorted view of what threats there are to your safety. And did you know that actually you're way more likely to die from air pollution crimes than you are from stranger homicide, right? By a factor of like 10 to 20, depending on where you live. So anyway, I think this point about what really is good propaganda is so critical, because people like you have done such a good job over the years of using your background and experience with the legal system and peeling away some of the layers for people and be like, hey, actually, like, everything that you're being told here is like a really sophisticated lie. The police are saying that what they're doing is public safety, but like, you know that only 4% of all police time is spent on what they call violent crime. I mean,
Right.
that's so vital.
Right. What do you think has been most when you talk to people and you try to like show them the light on propaganda? What do you think has had the most success in making them see where you're coming from?
That's a great question.
Thank you. I thought so.
um, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. Like, we are in a time when the background narratives that people have consumed and their attitudes, assumptions, and beliefs are like are like global warming denial. Like the extent to which people think that their safety is connected to police, prosecutors, and prisons is really hard to shake.
Yeah.
And so I've found like the most effective thing are showing specific examples to people of how their own emotions and knowledge are being manipulated in ways that are misleading and untrue, and walking them through particular stories and then showing them a lot of data. And I think like if you have the time with people, you can really, and this is what I try to do in the book. And I should just mention, all the royalties for the book are donated to charity. I don't make any money off of it.
Look at you and
We
your
have
good self, Alec. And look at you making everybody else look bad.
Well, I have a day job. I get paid fine, as a civil rights lawyer. I don't need to make money off of using, because I also think it's important to tell the people's stories
Yeah.
in this book, and to show how the life that people are actually living is so different from what's portrayed in the criminal system. And I think a lot of this stuff is not my story to tell. It's people that I work with and that I work on behalf of, and also we have free copies, just like with my last book, for any student. So any teacher that wants copies for their students, or anybody in prison, can have a free copy. And the reason for this is the book has a number of tools and examples. It has questions you guys can get together and ask your local journalists. It has questions you can get together and ask your local officials. It has tips for exposing propaganda and peeling away the layers of many different kinds of propaganda with stories and examples. And to me, like, there's no substitute for actually just like people learning this for themselves. It's one thing to like hear me say that the police are manipulating you, but what I try to do in the book is actually just like walk people step by step through actual examples, and that's the only thing that I've seen that really works.
Yeah, I agree. Like you have to, because we are so enmeshed in this hegemony and socialized in this culture of propaganda, you have to step by step show people. And um, something that also like this, I'm really interested in like cop adjacent professions. And how propaganda affects that. So like military is one, of course, but like I'm also thinking like firefighters. The way we talk, like firefighters are intertwined with policing in many ways. I grew up across the street from a firehouse in Columbus, Ohio, and there and I grew up. My parent was a police officer as well, and like that, I always go back to that firehouse. Always had police cars in it. There was a culture of this brotherhood sort of culture, and I'm like the way we talk about firefighters and other kind of adjacent to police jobs and people. I'm not saying that it's like, firefighters are bad or anywhere like cops, but like there is a certain way that we talk about those professions that are intertwined with policing. Progressive prosecutor is another one that I
Yeah.
can't stand. I teach a criminal law class, and not that long ago, I had a progressive federal prosecutor talk to my class, and they were talking about how, they don't have a cash bail system in the federal system, and it's much more equal, and it is much more fair. And like, I had to step in and say, but okay, and students, like this is still a prosecutor. This is still somebody whose job is to put people in prison for predominantly nonviolent things. So that language of progressive prosecution, that hero language that we talk about to adjacent sort of to policing professions, I think does a lot of work in the propaganda system, if not directly, and it's something I'm always mindful of.
I think
That's a good example because I work on that issue of bail a lot, right? And I actually was the lawyer in the case that struck down the way that they do money bail in California, in the California Supreme Court. And you hear this a lot from, progressive So progressive prosecutor is a term of propaganda. They're trying to convey something with it, right? So this is another theme of my book. A lot of the most like heinous and brutal and violent and right-wing stuff is repackaged for well-meaning people and low information liberals as like progressive, right? So there was a whole editorial by the right-wing San Francisco Chronicle reporter calling the current DA of San Francisco, who was funded by the right-wing recall campaign, who's accused of all these ethics violations. She just was put on diversion by the state bar in secret, violated all kinds of ethical rules according to these ethics petitions, right? Running on a right-wing campaign. The San Francisco Chronicle called her a progressive prosecutor. They framed her as challenging Boudin for the recall, but with progressive values. It's like when the police want to get something after they commit violence, they don't like ask for it themselves and have their police union demand it. They have like an independent commission, and then they call the things that they want reforms, even if those things are actually things that the police wanted all along to increase their own
Right.
size and power. And the bail stuff's the perfect example. The federal courts, Kyle's right, and this prosecutor is right that they don't use cash bail very much anymore in federal courts. They passed a reform law in the 1980s because it was seen as so unfair to jail people just because they couldn't make a payment. But on the day they passed that law in 1984, 25% of people accused of federal crimes were detained because they were poor. So it was a big problem,
Yeah.
right? Big problem. But today, with that progressive prosecutor is coming to Kyle's class, 75% of people charged with federal crimes are detained before trial. So they got rid of detaining people because they're
And that is just
poor.
remand you all together.
Yeah, they just
No,
remand you all
yep,
together. They just detain 3 times as many people now.
yes.
So that's the progressive version. And if you look at the actual demographics, the people are more poor, more black, more immigrant than they were 40 years ago. So this reform that she's calling progressive has actually made the problem 3
Well,
times worse at least. And that's calling that progressive is an act of propaganda. And I think we absolutely have to see that, because well-meaning people who watch like MSNBC, who want a society that is more equal and less carceral and things like that, they're falling for this stuff. It's propaganda designed for them.
what y'all are speaking to is what I refer to as condemning or discarding part in order to preserve the whole. And the way that happens for policing is what happens when the police departments give up one officer. Like, this officer's bad, he acted alone, he doesn't represent the entire police department, right? The bad apple. And it's similar to what's happened with policing in reference to the entirety of the criminal justice system, or the criminal system. There is no criminal justice system. That in and of itself is a propaganda term. But the police don't work alone. The police work in concert with the prosecutors, with the judges, with the legislators. It's not just them, right? It happens when they decide, from the mayor and whoever is in control, who decides how many police even go out onto the streets, what neighborhoods they're in, what laws are passed, what the sentencing is, how we are policing, what we are policing, whether or not the prosecutors go with the charges, how the judges. It's a million different arms, and it's not just the police, but it's become, what America has done now is, okay, the police look bad. All right. It's like the police are the problem. We have these other, and they ramp up the celebration of these other actors. So it's like, okay, good prosecutors, good on the judge and the legislators and everybody, but the police are painted as this just like one rogue force that won't get in line. But the rest of the system is still just. This is what justice is. We still need this. It's just that the police are occasionally acting out of order. So I think that's what happens there. And I think that's always very, very intentional. And I think that goes to what you were saying about the cop adjacent professions, Kyle, because I've thought about that. I've noticed people do, especially with firefighters. I see a lot of the memes, the funny memes, when people like, they never said fuck the firefighters. And it's funny because they say things like that, because it's meant to make it easy to be against police. Like, hey, police really are a problem. Notice we're not complaining about any of these other actors. We're not asking for too much here. We're just complaining about the police. And you see things like that get popular, and it seems like, oh, it's just jokey joke. It's fun. It's light work, but it conceals what the fire departments have their own histories of racism too. I'm like, all the firefighters in New York are from Staten Island. Take with that and do what you may. So I was like, so I said it to say there is this element of the other actors that conceal. Like, I think about it all the time. Some incarcerated person is killed, but not just people, focus on the police, but they don't think about the medical professionals, the staff that called the police on the person that was having the mental health episode at the hospital, or all these different kinds of incidents. They don't think about the different parts of these different professions and other people that work in concert with the police to criminalize certain populations. So I think that's a really valuable point.
I even think about like insurance. You cannot file an insurance claim for shit unless you have a police report. Like, there are so many things that are tied into that we don't even think about. And it's like, well, if you didn't contact the police, so it's not a problem, or you didn't contact the police, and I work on college campuses, and I've worked in college campuses for since I've known you, since we went to college together. And like, I don't know if you remember, in Athens, they would do that like perp walk all the time from on the college campus. The county jail was on the college campus right off of it, and they would walk from the jail to every single day. And it's just like, college campuses are cop towns by and large, and there's, I got a bike stolen at the university, and I couldn't do anything without filing a police report. And it's like, it's so intertwined in ways that we don't even think about and we don't know about, or most people don't.
Amazon wouldn't let me. My TV got stolen. I think it's so funny, as a perfect example of how the system works to support worthless police who don't do shit. So my TV, I ordered a TV from Amazon, and it got stolen out the hallway of my apartment. And in fairness, I'm a fool for leaving it there. I saw it was delivered, and I was like, oh, I'll just go to the gym, come right back, and take it up the stairs when I come. Listen, I have the video, because there's surveillance in my my apartment building, so I have the video of the guy. I'm telling you, the smoothest operation on jacking my TV. It was very clear. I know exactly in my mind which gal in the building set me up, because I saw her see me, and I know she called them, because the minute I left for the gym, they came in like smooth. They picked up the TV. It was two guys like, boop, boop. They were out immediately. I could only respect the game, right? And I have no problem with that. Like, I'm like, oh, whatever. I'm going to put in for a replacement at Amazon, right? Things get stolen. Amazon insists that in order for me to get my replacement, I have to file a police report. Now, here's what I think is so funny about systems that work to make the police essential when they don't do shit, right? First and foremost, I wouldn't want the police to do shit, because the do shit that people have in mind is to like go criminalize or go find out who they are, get them a charge. I don't do shit for nobody. I don't care about nothing that. Anyway, but they're damn sure not going to find my TV. The do shit people are usually referring to is punishing these, finding them. But there's no do shit that gets me my TV. So there's no way for me to be made whole by the policing, the criminal system, even if it worked as you're intending it work in your mind. But they also don't do that, because here's what I think is funny. The police, I have to call them to make the police report. First of all, they take 900 hours to show up. When they do finally show up, they ask me the information. I have a video of the guy stealing my TV. Like, if they did care in a world where, if you thought police solve crime, I have a video of them stealing my TV. The police know I have a video of them stealing my TV. They were like, oh, you have a video? Okay, I'll make a note of that. Not like, let me see it. Let me have the video. And they made a little racist joke about like, oh, well, you do live in Brooklyn. Like, so like, why my TV got stolen? They made a little joke about Brooklyn, and then they were like, oh, you got a video? No video, and never saw no contact information. I'm telling you, that was the police report. that was so essential that I filed. And the reason that's done is these police that don't do anything, they have no intention. And they know if you've had interactions with the police where you expect them to do something, the police respond to you as though it's crazy that you think they operate like TV. They're like they find it funny, like, I'm not gonna find you. TV's gone, like, but into Amazon. But the purpose of it is to create the idea that they're so essential. If all these services in these industries require you to use them, you can't move on without them. It validates this need to continue giving them more money and to act as though they're essential and you need more police, even though everybody involved knows they're not doing shit.
Mm-hmm.
That's my long way to say NYPD didn't give a fuck about my TV.
But I think that's such an important mythology that is presented as if the contrary view is so unserious that nobody reasonable could hold the view that, like, what you just said, nobody, like, the news portrait, like, they're flooding the subway with cops and they're saying that they're doing this to, like, stop crime, when, like, there's obviously other reasons they're flooding the subway with cops.
Yes.
Internal memos, leaked documents, whistleblowers. You don't even need, like, you could just look at the contracts and the overtime, and you could look at, like, all of the sort of history of why they do things like that, and it has nothing to do with crime. Like, everybody understands the cops are not going to solve or prevent the crime in the subway.
Yep.
That's not what they're doing. And also, like, that kind of investment is just a terrible return on investment for, like, if you cared about, like, any kind of social harm. So, like, that's obviously not why our society is doing those things. Same with cops in schools, et cetera, et cetera. But, like, day in, day out, and this is another, like, just essential theme of Copaganda that I try to dissect with examples in the book. The stated motivations of people in power are treated as their actual motivation. So
yeah.
I give these examples of, like, Eric Adams in the New York Times is talking about New York Times in 2024, in 2023, in 2022, the New York Times is literally saying that Eric Adams is returning to broken windows policing to prevent crime. As if there isn't a body of research about how broken windows policing does not protect crime. As if Adams doesn't know that. As if there's no other reasons why real estate developers and others want the NYPD, why NYPD itself for their overtime budget and there's so many reasons that everybody involved, including the New York Times reporters, knows that they're going to broken windows policing. And yet, for the audience, it's always portrayed as some, like, good faith attempt. It's like, we're gonna be, adding more police on the subway to address mental illness, as if anybody believes that more cops are the way to address mental illness in our society, or homelessness, as if people believe that more cops and not more housing is going to help homelessness. I mean, but these mythologies are so ingrained every single day that, and I think my favorite of them, and I give a lot of examples about this in the book, is the drug war. Even now, we've spent trillions of dollars on the drug war. We have literally put 50 plus million human beings into cages. We have, like, chemically sprayed and firebombed much of Latin America to destroy crops. We have surveilled the communication of billions of people. We've separated hundreds of millions of kids from their family. We've killed hundreds of thousands of people in the drug war. And yet, overdose deaths are at all-time highs. Dangerous drugs are more available than ever. Everyone involved in this process knows that the war on drugs, and even now we have Nixon, behind the scenes Nixon tapes and whistleblowers that actually say that they knew at the time. Everybody knows the war on drugs was never about reducing the use of drugs. Okay, that was just never what it was about. It was about targeting Black people, poor people, anti-war people, etc. And it has all kinds of other purposes in our society that it plays from, like, an economic and political perspective. But, like, still, like, the Associated Press, the New York Times, NBC, whenever, like, the Alabama legislature is talking about increasing penalties for fentanyl, they portray it as, like, a good faith attempt to reduce overdoses. I mean, that kind of propaganda is so subtle, but it's this assertion that all these systems are well-meaning and serving the purposes that they say, as opposed to the purposes that they actually have.
Yeah, they have an ironclad propaganda machine, because the police, it's funny, the police have it set up where it works both ways for them. If if they say crime is bad, crime is out of control, crime is higher, okay, then the answer is more police. If they say, oh, it's safe, crime is down, then oh, that means policing was working, we need more police. Like either way, they have flipped it where that's always the answer, no matter how illogical it is. And it's so interesting because it doesn't matter how much we do it, it doesn't matter how much we've poured into it, it doesn't matter how much the same people that support over policing and putting more and more and more money into the prison industrial complex, those same people continue to tell you they are not safe, but they are not even willing to contend with or reason with the idea that policing and this doesn't work, that we shouldn't keep doing that. Anytime you suggest to them anything else, they are acting as though you need. It's funny how much like policing doesn't need to be defended. It doesn't need to make sense. It doesn't need to make sense why pouring more and more money into policing does. They don't need it. They don't need logic. They don't need a plan. But anything else, you could give all the data for how it doesn't work. You can give all the examples, the anecdotes of how it's played out, any and everything, and people just go, nah, close my ears to it. I need more police. It's so hard to beat that narrative.
It is. I'm thinking about, so we have the special election this week for the mayor of Oakland, and Barbara Lee and Lauren Taylor, and like the number one issue according to the news, we're talking about news and like Copaganda, is like, what is the plan for the shortage, the 800 cop shortage in Oakland? And Barbara Lee, the most liberal, progressive, number one progressive in Congress for 26 years, voted against the AUMF, has all these progressive credentials, is putting forward plans to have 3 police academies and all of these plans to increase policing. And it's like, that became the number one issue of this race. And because of Barbara Lee's sort of credentials in Congress, I think people are associating that with like, oh, that's okay. Like if she's supporting it, it can't be that bad. But it gets to that thing that like I really believe that the news, the Chronicle and the East Bay Times and the Mercury Sentinel or the Mercury News, they have made that this cop shortage in Oakland is the issue of the mayoral race. And then that is requiring everybody to respond and to come up with these plans. And it's like, it's so obvious how intertwined all of that is.
They always do that because they make safety synonymous with policing, so that every election cycle, oh, it's like crime is the issue, people want to feel safe. But to me, crime is the issue always means, how that's translated, what the media is putting forward is, if crime is an issue, that means to care about crime, you must support over policing. It's never, oh, crime is an issue, we agree, we care about safety. Let's talk about what actually achieves safety. And let's talk about how we address these routes. Let's talk about providing, like pouring money into the community. It's so insane to me that in America, something like saying investing in communities and people would help is met as so ridiculous, like such a ludicrous notion. And it's because the media frames it that way. And what they do with the manufacturing consent is by coming out and saying this is the biggest issue, people read that, even the people themselves that are in these communities and know what the biggest issues are to them, which is not that, and think, oh, well, that's what everyone's saying. Everybody's saying they want this. So yeah. And that's what happens.
I'm going to be in Oakland this weekend, and so maybe I'll mention this and talk about it with folks at some of my book events there. But I think that I have a whole chapter in the book on this idea that the news reports a police shortage, because it's really funny to me. Like you go to places and they're like, oh, I mean, there's an 800 cop shortage in Oakland, or you know what? There's currently a 3,000 cop shortage in the NYPD, and it's like as if there was some like scientific determination that the exact number of policing that's needed in Oakland is like 4,207, and it just so happens to be what some budget document said from 3 years ago, or some police chief said, right? Like as opposed to like, well, wait a second, what about the societies that have far lower violent crime? How many armed government agents do they have? How much of their percentage of their budget do they spend on policing, prosecution, and jail? What else do they invest in? If policing, prosecution, imprisonment made us safe, we'd have the safest society in the history of the world.
Yes.
And it's so interesting how this shortage stuff is reported as if it's some kind of a fact, as opposed to a heavily contested and contestable ideological and political statement. Because by asserting there's 800 cop shortage in Oakland, you are taking a position that the city would be better off. It actually needs 800 more armed government surveillance bureaucrats, who have the power to essentially unaccountably to cage people, beat them up, tase them, shoot them. Anyway, I mean, it's really what the more you think about it, the more unconscionable and depraved, honestly, it is for to pass that kind of stuff off as apolitical journalism. That this idea that there's a shortage of 800 cops, and so anyway, I'll come to Oakland, and maybe Barbara Lee will come to my book event, and maybe she'll change course.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Before we go, Alec, tell everybody what's the name of your book and where they can buy it.
So the book is called Copaganda. You can buy it anywhere books are sold. I'm really, really grateful to you for having me on the show, and for meeting you too, Kyle. I think because the book is so critical of the mainstream news, I'm sort of getting blacklisted by a lot of the mainstream publications. So
I could see that.
hopefully people will see this and go out and get the book. Again, all royalties are donated to this incredible group in California called the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, which organizes unhoused people in Skid Row in LA to fight against police repression and surveillance of the unhoused community. So all the money that comes to the royalties are going to go to them. And also, if you're a teacher or in college, high school, law school, grad school, you can have free books for your students. And also, if you know people in prison, if you send books into people in prison, you can have free books. So we're really just trying to get the ideas in this book out there more, and I'm grateful to you for giving me a chance to talk about the book today.
Thank you, Alec. I am literally, people don't know it, but I always tell everybody, I'm like, oh, my first Breakfast Club interview is literally only because Alec brought me. I was like, Alec had the interview and Alec brought me. Okay, so this is literally me not even returning a fraction of the favor. I just wanted to talk to you anyway. It's literally no thank you necessary, Alec. I always want you to come tell people about Copaganda, and I'm so glad I dragged Kyle. Kyle is my real friend from college. And I was like, oh, I want to talk to Kyle. Also, Kyle, before I even let you go, it would be egregious of me to let you go be free without bringing up the time you didn't know dinosaurs were real.
You didn't let me live. I thought,
Kyle, I want you to know, every time I see a reptile, it don't even have to be a dinosaur, I be in this house, kyak, 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 and that was the funniest shit. Alec, our senior year of Kyle. How did it come up, Kyle? How did it even come up?
I don't even know, but for me, dinosaurs lived in the realm of like ogres and Shrek and unicorns, and Alimi never let me live when she gleefully informed me that my public school education was.
That is what I told him. I think we were at my house, we were at my apartment or something. I feel like I remember talking about like Dragon Tales or something, making like a Dragon Tales reference.
Maybe.
And you were like, yeah, like all that make believe. And I was like, what'd you say, Kyle? Like, they're not real?
Yes.
I love you so much, friend. I'm so glad you came to bless the show. Thank y'all so much.